everyone, I'm Dr. Z. I'm a clinical psychologist specializing in transgender care. Welcome to my channel. Today I want to discuss with you the difference between cross-dressing and somebody who cross-dresses either for personal reasons or for sexual reasons, and the difference between somebody who identifies as transgender. This tends to be a very confusing overlap for a lot of individuals, and I'll explain to you today why I think some of you tend to feel confusion between the two. So to start off with, cross-dressing in of itself is kind of a broad term that has taken on a much bigger and broader meaning, but generally speaking, cross-dressing basically means an individual that is cross-dresses, meaning they wearing clothes and items of clothing to enhance the expression of themselves of the stereotypically opposite gender. And cross-dressing is usually something that people do in order to feel good about themselves. They do this because they feel much more comfortable in a cross-dressing attire. A lot of people also engage in cross-dressing behavior as a way to sexually arouse themselves, and that way to achieve an orgasm, which just becomes kind of a sexual, I don't want to say, the word I was going to use was not the right word, but becomes kind of a sexual end goal of cross-dressing. Not everybody who engages in cross-dressing seeks sexual gratification or seeks sexual pleasure. Some people just cross-dress because it makes them feel wonderful and makes them feel good, makes them much more in touch with themselves. It doesn't necessarily even mean that a lot of people will cross-dress because they feel much more in touch with the gender that they're cross-dressing over. It may just mean that the expression of themselves in clothing of opposite gender just makes them feel good in general. Some people who identify as cross-dressers don't really see clothing as gender specific. They have a belief that clothes are a gender to begin with, and so cross-dressing enables them privacy and safe way to explore that. So as you can see, cross-dressing is a little bit much more broader territory. I think a lot of people who think of cross-dressers, they automatically think about people who cross-dress for sexual pleasure, which is, again, not always the case. A lot of times people will just cross-dress and they'll just, they'll sit around their home or carry on their personal activities without any sexual pleasure being an end goal. It becomes a little bit confusing for some people because as we know, people who identify as transgender, people who are struggling with gender dysphoria, will a lot of times cross-dress as a way to experiment, cross-dress as a way to get in touch with the genders they really feel themselves to be. As a result, cross-dressing is also a term that is kind of sips a little bit into transgender territory. But I don't think that's necessarily accurate, and a lot of people really like to prefer expression dressing in feminine or dressing in masculine or dressing in non-binary clothing versus saying that they cross-dress per se because they don't feel like they're really cross-dressing. So that's where really the confusion lies, because generally speaking, individuals who cross-dress just for the sake of enjoying wearing the opposite gender's clothing or in order to achieve sexual pleasure, those people, the biggest difference between those individuals is that they do not have, in my experience, they do not have an incongruency with their biological sex. They have no problem with their assigned gender. So for example, if assigned male at birth cross-dresses during their free time, whether just for pleasure or for sexual gratification, usually if you talk to them, most often they will say that, no, I feel very comfortable being a man. I have no interest in transitioning or have no interest in being seen as opposite gender or anything in between out in society. I feel very comfortable carrying out manly roles. In other words, I feel very congruent and comfortable with my gender. Cross-dressing is something that I enjoy, something that gives me pleasure, sexual or otherwise, and therefore that's why I engage in that behavior. And that is the biggest difference between people who cross-dress and transgender people. Transgender people are usually individuals who do, not usually, are individuals who do have incongruency or do have discomfort with their biological sex. So for somebody who identifies as a transgender, cross-dressing, or like I said before, expressing yourself in a feminine, masculine, or non-binary clothing is a way to bring you closer to your desired gender. So in the end of the day, if an individual who identifies as transgender were to go back to wearing their preconceived, so to speak, normal clothing, they would tell you that I still feel very incongruent with my body. I still feel very incongruent with my gender, where somebody who cross-dresses will not. So that is the biggest difference. Where it becomes very confusing is here. Occasionally, individuals who are transgender, who identify as trans, when they would cross-dress, in order to get closer to their desired gender, they will also experience sexual arousal that a lot of times will lead to an orgasm. So as a result, there's that confusion there. Especially a lot of people in the beginning of their exploration phase, when they engage in this behavior, and if they're older especially, if they get sexually aroused and have an orgasm, a lot of time people will start thinking that, oh, just because I have a sexual pleasure or derive sexual pleasure out of cross-dressing, that means that I'm not trans. That means that I'm just a cross-dresser. And that's not really accurate. Again, you have to ask yourself, where if I were to go back to my everyday living activities in the genders that I come across to socially and around in my interpersonal life, am I comfortable with my body? And if you're not comfortable with your body, chances are you're talking about gender issue, right? So you have to be careful, but that's where people tend to confuse it. They tend to confuse it with cross-dressing because they are experiencing sexual pleasure. Now, why is it that somebody who identifies as transgender would experience sexual pleasure when they cross-dress? And there's a lot of ideas out there on why that happens. My personal hypothesis on why that happens is this. When we are keeping something that we strongly desire on internal plane hidden, some things that we so strongly want, we keep it as a secret, meaning your trans identity, you desire to be of different gender, you keep it so hidden, so internally. When you actually have a chance to explore it by cross-dressing, that kind of kept libidinal energy that has kept secret can cross over into sexual libidinal energy, and as a result you can feel aroused and excited because you're finally engaging in something that you weren't allowed to or didn't allow yourself to engage in for a while. So as a result, it will come across physically, physiologically in your body as a sexual energy. But it's still different, right? Because the cross-dressers who engage in cross-dressing just for sexual pleasure alone, the end goal is orgasm. So in other words, they already know that, if I cross-dress, I'm going to get sexually aroused. So it's really part of a sexual inner fantasy play for them. For trans people, it's the beginning of it is not a sexual interplay. I don't really know any trans individuals who will tell me that they begin cross-dressing with the fantasy of getting sexual aroused. That just sometimes happens to be a byproduct of it. And that's again where people get very confused because they get surprised that, oh my God, I can't believe it led to sexual arousal. I wasn't expecting to get sexual aroused. What does it mean if I'm sexually aroused? Again, people get sexual aroused all the time, and so especially when we keep something as a secret, that secret becomes sexually charged energetically. It's like becomes this libidinal sexual energies that manifest physiologically as orgasm. So that's a clear clarifications for you there, is that again, so people who cross-dress are doing it for a lot of reasons, including sexual gratification, and it does not mean they're transgender. Most of the time, if not all of the time, people who cross-dress are not transgender. They feel very, very comfortable with their biological assigned gender at birth, and they're not really interested in transitioning at all. This is just something that they do personally that gives them pleasure, sexual or otherwise. Whereas transgender people who do tend to cross-dress do it in order to get closer to a desired gender. Sexual arousal and gratification can be a byproduct by that, but it doesn't in any way negate the fact that to begin with, you're doing that in order to bring yourself closer to yourself. So that's hopefully that clarifies the difference between the two, and hopefully that helps some of you, because I think it can be very confusing. Comment below, let me know what you think. Share some of your insights, some of your questions. I always read your comments, and I'll see you guys all next time. Bye.